Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn's Thrive in China Roundtable. This is our weekly roundtable where we talk about corporate administrative functions within a Chinese business and things you might have not thought about in terms of operating and trading with China. So before we get cracking on today's session, it always helps me to have a little bit of understanding about our audience. I would love to know from our audience, are you a newbie? Are you a startup in China? Are you an experienced China hand? This always allows me to have a bit of insight on who the audience is and potentially what you are looking for when you join these roundtables or when you're watching these roundtables on replay. So don't hesitate to give me a bit of insight. For those of you that are watching live, put that into the chat box. For those of you that are watching this on replay, message us and let us know what your background is. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I have been, I've got to update that, but I've been now 20 years in the corporate services and compliance space for China and Hong Kong. Our head office is based in Hong Kong, and we have our subsidiary in Shanghai, where we cater to our mainland China clients. We predominantly work with foreign invested companies that are looking to set up operations in Hong Kong and China. We help them with their market strategy, pre-investment advisory, all the way through to implementation and then focusing on growth and scale. I am also the creator of, or I have created, administrative processes to help foreign investors understand the corporate administration landscape. We have these administrative processes up on webinar recordings, up on our website. If you're interested to watch them, don't hesitate to do so. It might give you insight on business models that you can create, but as well as your to-do list and your checklist for setting up your foundation and making sure that you've got the right structure for growth and scale. And last but not least, if you haven't received a free copy, we're providing all of our roundtable attendees with a free copy of our ebook, The 10 Biggest Mistakes Companies Make in China. If you want to receive a copy, then email me at christina@woodburnglobal.com. Now, in 2023, this is roundtable number 10, where we are looking at the advantages of having a non-executive director in China. Non-executive directors, what are they? A lot of people have not heard of this terminology. They're not clear on what a non-executive director does. They don't understand what the voting rights are. So that is what we're going to get into. And I'm also going to explain the advantages, the disadvantages, and conclude with kind of my summary of why you might need to have a non-executive director on board. So under Chinese law, there is no legal concept of the non-executive director. However, if you have a listed company in China, you must have an independent director system, and at least 1/3 of the board members must be independent directors, including at least one professional accounting firm. But under Chinese law, if you are just setting up a foreign invested company, even a joint venture, there is no legal concept of the non-executive director. So what I'm going through here today is the global concept of what a non-executive director does and how it would pertain to managing, running, operating your Chinese business. So in China, in general, the non-executive director is appointed and chosen in the same way that any of the corporate management people, meaning the board of directors, executive directors, legal rep, GM, supervisors are appointed, and that is ultimately by the shareholder. So it's the shareholder's decision as to whether they would need to have a non-executive director on board. This non-executive director, again, from a legal mind frame, is not input in any of the government systems, meaning that actually nobody from the Chinese government knows that you have enrolled somebody in this position, okay? The non-executive director is very much an internal decision by the shareholder. Do you need one? Do you not need one? And it's about weighing out the pros and cons of what they are actually going to offer you. And ultimately, we're going to look at 3 of the disadvantages related to them as well. So it's very much an internal decision. Nobody has to have one. It's just that I have realized that not many people know that this is a possibility and that it exists. Okay, so I want throughout this roundtable for people to educate themselves on what this could actually bring to your Chinese company. Now, a non-executive director is ultimately independent advisors to a company. They are members of the board of directors. They sit on director meetings. They are ultimately there for strategy development and to give positive criticism, external advice, and ultimately their expertise on the Chinese market. They are actually there to bounce your strategy for China on a continuous basis and to help you pivot or bring up certain situations that you might not have even thought about. Because again, when you're doing business in China, my spiel is always, you only know what you know. And the issue is there's so much to know and there's so much knowledge that you have to gain. Sometimes it helps to have a non-executive director who's got 15, 20, 25, 30 odd years of experience in China to give you that insight. Now, ultimately, the non-executive director oversees the activity that is occurring, but they're not involved in the day-to-day operations. So they're literally on the strategy development side, overseeing the implementation of that strategy, and also checking that certain goals and KPIs are met. And they are reporting to the shareholders whether actually the execution is happening in the right way, and whether any red signs have to be dealt with or suspicious signs have to be dealt with, right? They're overseeing ultimately what's going on in the China business. Now, I want to highlight today 8 responsibilities of a non-executive director in China. And this is just my opinion of what a non-executive director should bring to your China business. And if they don't hit all these 8 points, then this is not a solution for you. It might not even bring you an added advantage, okay? If they do hit all of these 8 responsibilities and they can deliver on these 8 responsibilities, then this could be an extreme added value for you in terms of starting up your business in China, especially in the growth and the scaling stage, okay? Now, ultimately, the non-executive director is going to spend time overseeing the company and joining management meetings and board meetings. They might even join separate meetings as well if they're referring partners, but I'll get to that a little bit later on. They should be adding value, okay? The minute that they don't add any more value, it means that you have matured, if you will, become an adult, or your China business has become an adult where you don't need their services anymore. So a non-executive director, again, if you do want one, is not necessarily something that is permanent for the whole journey and lifespan of your operation, okay? Might only be useful for certain aspects of your operation. All right, so the 8 responsibilities. One is doing a China company performance review. This is ultimately evaluating the performance of the Chinese company, evaluating the management team and the execution team to make sure that the goals and objectives are being reached. They're monitoring decisions that are being made by the executive team, making sure that, hopefully they're also making sure that it's in China compliance. They're reporting all of this to the shareholders. In addition to that, they should also be reviewing the company's financial records to verify that what is being executed can be seen from the financial records. And there should be a type of budgetary control, again, to ensure responsibility and to ensure that the company is going in the right direction, okay? That's the first responsibility. The second responsibility is the China strategic direction, right? They're responsible for developing the strategic plan for China, implementing that strategic plan. They're not going to physically do it themselves, but they're overseeing that the execution team is actually doing it. they're going to give criticism, judgment, hopefully in a positive way and not in a negative way that everybody suddenly turns and wants to fight against them, but in a positive way that good change can happen within the company, okay? We want to make sure that the company continues on a growth scale, right? And the whole point of having this non-executive director is ultimately that you listen to them. You listen to their criticism, you listen to their judgment, you listen to their advice, you listen to their experience to understand how you can pivot your business in the right direction, okay? They are providing external perspective, meaning they're not an in-house employee. Their goal and objective, and maybe even their monetary goal and objective for themselves, is to hit certain targets. And that's what they're going to try and achieve. The whole point of a non-executive director is to follow the philosophy of Kaizen, continuous improvement and efficiency within the organization. Time commitment. The non-executive director, like I said, is not a full-time employee. They are probably part-time. They will usually indicate the number of hours they have available to spend on the company. And they will also indicate their responsibilities and what their deliverables are going to be, okay? Now, it's up to the company and the individual, the non-executive director, to decide how much time commitment is actually necessary. And this all has to be agreed upon before. It could very well be that some months the non-executive director is spending more time and other months less. It just depends on what's actually happening in the business. But overall, it needs to even itself out over that contract period. Now, risk management is critical. The whole point of the non-executive director is for this person to actually find or see the signs, the red flags, the suspicious warnings in order to mitigate risk, whether it's economic risk, financial risk, director liability risk, whatever it might be. They are really there to mitigate any form of risk in China, to implement corporate governance, give their opinion on how corporate governance should be formulated in an efficient manner, that it doesn't halt the growth of the business. But they are there to make sure that the execution team and all the other staff and employees are actually following these corporate governance regulations, okay? And obviously they're going to report then to the shareholder regarding the risk within the company. Are we at a period of high risk, low risk? Are there things? And then obviously providing solutions on how to mitigate it. The non-executive role, I think this is actually one of the most important for China, is the people in the network. Why are you hiring a non-executive director? It's because you want to use their ecosystem of people who can help you to grow and scale in China. The non-executive director should have a network of companies and individuals in China that, one, can help support your business, help you grow your business, and ultimately hit the goals and objectives. It might not just be all done in-house, it will also be external parties that are going to help you. To give you an example of this, just to offer a case study where I've been a non-executive director for an F&B company. And I introduced them to my network of logistics providers, e-commerce providers, distributors. And as part of the responsibility, they wanted me to join these meetings to help them evaluate the partners. These are people in my network, but ultimately I referred 3-4 different providers for each category of people of companies they needed to outsource to. And I'll never forget the first call that I joined for evaluating an e-commerce provider. My client wanted to sign the contract right there and then. And I had to halt the meeting and say, stop, we're not negotiating the contract. We're going to look at this at a later stage. And I also told the provider, we're also looking at 2 to 3 of your competitors, and we're going to make a comparison. Now, initially, my client was a bit taken aback at how brash I was, but I wanted him to evaluate. And when we got off of that meeting, he openly said to me, Christina, I just got so excited. It's the first time I was able to properly communicate with a provider in China who understood my goals and objectives. And I was ready to sign right there and then. And I said, I understand that, but the 2 to 3 other providers will have the same English language capabilities as this one. Let's compare. We have to compare fees, service level, what their deliverables are going to be, how they're going to actually give you those deliverables, and then we can decide. He was very grateful because in the end, he actually chose another provider at that stage. But this is what a non-executive director is supposed to do. It's to help you evaluate the people or the network you're going to be collaborating with, the pros and cons of them, and give you that insight because they should have market knowledge. Okay, so there should be a form of introduction, but there should also be a form of evaluation on who you're going to collaborate with. And then there's the professional development. Now, non-executive directors might not necessarily have your expertise in the industry and sector that you are in. So they have to probably get independent training in order to be able to fulfill their duties. For me, with this F&B company, I'm not an F&B specialist, but I did ask for training on their product portfolio. I needed to understand all the products that they had, what they were interested in selling into China to give insight, but then also know which providers would be suitable based on that product portfolio. So independent training is needed. I also had a meeting with the owners of the company to understand what their risk level was. I needed to understand from them, what were they willing to invest? What was their risk and commitment for the market to gauge how far I could push? Because as a non-executive director, you have to also understand how far can you criticize, right? You need to know what the objectives and goals are by the owners themselves. Now, participation and conducting company meetings is also critical, whether this is with board members, owners, people within your ecosystem, or staff members, okay? It's important to lay out the rules of this prior to actually setting up the non-executive director service, because maybe, the execution team doesn't want you to get involved with day-to-day staff members. I think that's a mistake. I think they should once in a while get involved to gauge actually whether a staff member is productive or not. It doesn't always look good when there's, again, positive criticism being made on somebody that was hired, and that person, the GM, is defending them, but actually they're not productive at all, and they don't lose face, right? Somebody has to stand back and be objective. Can't have any emotion when you're trying to grow and scale in China. And again, the whole point of the non-executive director is that there is no emotion. You are standing objectively behind the scenes, and you have to occasionally evaluate the providers. That is their role. Again, to mitigate risk, but also to make sure that if a provider is slacking, you terminate and you start fresh again, right? You always have to have a backup of providers behind. And number 8, oops, let me switch slides, is to provide, let me go back. Oh, my slides moved too fast. Let me just make sure I'm on the right spot. Is to provide perspective, okay? They are there to share their experience. So hiring somebody who's only had 2 years of experience in China is useless. You need somebody who's had a lengthy term of experience in China to give that perspective, to give case studies, to show proof of how things work, and how things can be improved. It's somebody who understands the regulations and when regulations change, how to then pivot the business. They're offering a broader view and a broader perspective on how to grow and scale your business, but ultimately how to also create that foundation, everything from the startup onwards. And the key thing is obviously having people on the other side who are receptive to listening to that criticism or that perspective, okay? Now, I always find it very, very interesting as a non-executive director to have a certain perspective and to naturally have the GM or the senior management staff in China provide, or let's say debate against the perspective I have offered. Listen, I am open myself to criticism, but I don't want to receive criticism if there is nothing backing it up. Just to say no because you don't want to lose face, that's a cultural issue. But if the local team are saying, actually, Christina, your perspective is not right because in our industry or sector, which you're not familiar with, we have to do it this way. That's highlighting then their experience specific to their industry and sector in China that I may not have. The non-executive director is not the true north or the true fact. It's somebody just to brainstorm with, debate, give another side of the coin, that you are thinking of all sides and all scenarios, whether economically, financially, human related. It's somebody that you're bouncing ideas off of in order to make sure you're going in the right direction. And most of the time for me, the non-executive director really only makes sense when you're starting up your business, starting up your operation to get that insight to build that solid foundation. Now, let's look at the advantages of having a non-executive director. And I'm hoping this will help you to evaluate whether this could be something of use to you in whatever stage of your China journey you are in, okay? So the number one advantage is that the executive director is speaking to HQ, speaking to senior management, and objectively providing insight. Now, why do I find this of value? It's because one of the biggest struggles with companies in China is the communication between the Chinese team and the headquarters. There is tremendous amount of misunderstanding, miscommunication, and this bridge that is being formulated is just constantly cracking. It's not even being built. The whole point of the non-executive director is for somebody to stand objectively behind and be on the side of the Chinese team, but also be on the side of the HQ and act as this intermediary bridge. It's a communication point. This can speed up a lot of decisions by having this intermediary there. I know so many GMs in China who are frustrated on how slow HQ makes decisions, on how slow it is when an idea is being offered by China, and how slow it is before an actual initiative is given or a discussion is made. The point of the executive director is to actually get this done. Help the GM communicate, make a decision as fast as possible. Because again, time is of the essence in China and we're trying to grow. The non-executive director is also there to challenge the performance of the team in China. Okay, so if people are not performing or there are certain red flags, red signs, or suspicious warnings, they are there to immediately report that to HQ. Because my biggest mistake was maintaining staff that were of no use to my business and didn't provide added value. We want to build a performing team that consistently provides added value. Or we mentioned here management team. I also want to add here, as part of the network of external contacts, you also have to evaluate them and challenge their performance as well. Okay. So the third one is ensuring also that the board members achieve their objectives, right? Now you're going to have board members that are probably based in the HQ. And most of the time, China is so complex from them or so far away from them that they don't really look at what their role and responsibilities are. What decisions do they have to make and how quick do they have to make them? So it's also part of the non-executive director's role to push them and help the China team. Now, people can look at this different ways. You can say, I only need a non-executive director who's got experience in my field, in my industry, in my sector, because I want them to bring an added value, because I prioritize network over other aspects. Others might see it differently, saying, actually, I don't want somebody in my industry or field because I want somebody to take an objective point of view to give an overview of what's happening within my organization. There's no right or wrong in this. I always just feel somebody not in your industry or sector can probably give you a wider perspective. And who says that you don't need more than one non-executive director? You could have one that's not in your field and another one who is. You can also say that the one non-executive director is not in your field because your GM is in your field and has experience in your industry and sector. The key of the non-executive director is to bring added value and to bring in an additional network of external contacts and evaluate those, right? And last but not least, to fill the expertise gap. Now, I'm going to add on to that point by saying that there's also a trust aspect with the China team. And although the non-executive director is not dealing in the day-to-day running of the business in China, they will probably have a lot of insight into, sorry, let me rephrase that, in alleviating the fear from the management team and the headquarter about their China team. So not only are they filling in the expertise gap, but they're also filling in and eliminating this fear of running a business in China, of investing in China, of running a team in China. Ultimately, they should be alleviating this stress and fear factor away from the management team. And if they're not doing that, then they're not doing their job. All right. Now, I can't, the title of this presentation is what are the advantages? So I did want to focus on that, but I do want to touch on 3 disadvantages of having a non-executive director. One is trust. Now, if your general manager in China feels like the non-executive director is undermining him, which again, that shouldn't happen either, because it should be teamwork. And then obviously that GM can go to the board and say, I don't trust this guy, or I don't trust this woman. I feel like they're going against us. What we want is that the non-executive director builds a rapport with both sides, China GM and the HQ. You need to feel both parties that you are not on one side or the other. You're actually there to bring everybody together into a solid group. If there is a lack of trust on either side of that bridge, there's no point in having a non-executive director, or it's just the wrong person to have on that team. The other is quality. If those responsibilities, those 8 responsibilities that I highlighted are not being met, then again, it's a sign that that relationship is not prospering. And then ultimately liability, right? There might be poor remuneration, or liability in law might also reduce the potential for non-executive directors, meaning that, you just might feel like you don't need one. Like I said, under Chinese law, there is no necessity for you to have a non-executive director. It is really an internal decision of whether they can provide added value. The question is, they can be expensive, but again, it's not going to be a long-term project in reality. I was a non-executive director for this F&B brand that I was telling you about for 18 months. After that, I actually terminated myself. They didn't need me anymore. They didn't want to come on the calls with me anymore. They were running it. They were executing, and it was all going very smoothly. So they just didn't need me anymore. And I actually was said, guys, you're independent now. Run. It's like children growing up, right? And they went off and did it. So you also want to have a non-executive director that's going to be ethical in this manner and say, guys, you don't need me anymore. I've given you everything I know. You're running off with it now. Move forward. So there are disadvantages, and it's a matter of evaluating that relationship consistently. Now, one thing that I do want to highlight before we finish today's presentation is the difference between an executive director and a non-executive director, because this also has to be highlighted, what one does and what the other one does, so that there's no competition between the two, okay? Now, an executive director does day-to-day management, okay? You can call it executive director, general manager, or managing director, as you wish. They are doing the day-to-day management of the company. They are hiring people. They are executing the strategy in China, whether they reside in China or not. The non-executive director is not at all involved in the day-to-day running of the business. Their role is very simply to challenge and develop the strategy for China to make sure that it is hitting its goals and objectives. I don't want people to assume that the executive director and non-executive director are fighting each other to move ahead. They actually need to work in collaboration. The minute that the executive director runs into an obstacle or runs into a rock or a wall and doesn't know in which way to go, the point of the non-executive director is to brainstorm with them What should I do? Do you have any ideas? I'm thinking of doing X, Y, and Z, but I'm nervous and I'm not sure about this decision. It is using them to bounce ideas off in order to avoid these obstacles and roadblocks that can come along the journey. Okay, again, in order to be able to move forward. The non-executive director is also standing objectively outside of the organization with an overview into the organization to make sure that everything is running smoothly and is in compliance, and that there's continuous improvement and efficiency. And ultimately, that from a financial perspective, it's being budgeted accordingly, but also that risk is being mitigated. Okay. Now, I have concluded in very simple terms what I believe a non-executive director should do in China. One is keep the management and stakeholders accountable on their actions, help to build the communication bridge between the China team and the HQ, build the company's China ecosystem, meaning the network of third parties, employees, whomever. With one company as non-executive director, I actually was part of the recruitment team to hire their CFO, as well as their brand manager. And I did interviews. I was doing the interviews, and that was part of my responsibility list as well, to give my insight on what I felt these candidates could do and could not do. Non-executive directors is really just a technical term for a mentor in China. What mistakes to avoid, raise red flags, and a lot of things are done by gut feeling when somebody's been in China for so long. It's really seeing and feeling sensitive situations that might be arising. And ultimately, the non-executive director is there to educate about regulations, system processes, all aspects, really, of running the company. Ideas on sales initiatives, ideas on branding initiatives. Have they thought about this? Have they thought about that? Do we need to switch logistics providers? Do we need to switch TPs? Do we need to find new suppliers in China instead of importing products in? It's really educating people on what they can and cannot do in the market. So the question really is that I want people to evaluate is, number one, this role exists in China. There are individuals out there who offer their services for this. At Woodburn, I offer this service myself. Do you need a non-executive director to implement, scale, and grow your China business? Do you need somebody to help validate, provide positive criticism, build your foundation, recruit senior management, or validate the recruitment of senior management? Help with the communication, because there's just either no alignment at all, and you need somebody to help build that alignment, that people come into agreement. This bridge thing, please don't underestimate it. It causes so much disalignment between HQ and China. It can halt the business. And in some instances, I have seen it where companies have exited the market because of this zero alignment. So again, not a compulsory position. This is totally voluntary, whether you need to have 1, 2, 3 people in this role to help you grow your business, help brainstorm ideas, and help you pivot. And understand that it's not a long-term relationship. It is something that can be just short-term for the first year, 18 months, 2 years, that you've got somebody, a mentor near you, that you can talk to. Because definitely building a business in China can be very lonely. And having somebody either in HQ or that they can just talk to and have on speed dial can be of value. So if you are interested to learn more about what we do as a non-executive director, so you've got more insight on how it actually works, please do reach out to us. Your question might be, where can you find non-executive directors? Just Google it. Also type it into LinkedIn, non-executive director China, and you will see what pops up in that regard. I would love to hear what your biggest takeaway from today was. And if you've got any questions, insert them into the chat box. If you want more advice on doing business in China or Hong Kong, you can set up a call with me. The link is there. I will also provide it in the email in case you want to have a quick conversation. We can hit some of your pain points. Last but not least, thank you for joining our Thrive in China Roundtable. If you feel like any of your colleagues or friends would find this useful, give them the link to our website. They can sign up. It's free of charge. Next week's roundtable is going to be on Fapiao accounting. What is Fapiao accounting? How does it relate to the issuance of Fapiaos? And how does it impact you when you want to read, understand your Chinese financial management reports? That is for next week's topic. I want to thank everyone that showed up live today for coming in. No questions have popped in. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I hope to see you again next Wednesday. Have a great afternoon. Take care and goodbye.